So self-help books, I think, is a very good band-aid solution at times. Like it's gonna put up a band-aid, but if the wound is deep, the band-aid is just not gonna work. Also, the band-aid works for like a couple of days and comes off, right? So you've got to keep replacing it.
Hey guys, welcome to a fresh episode of Bookversations where we are going to talk about all things books. Today on the panel, we have a very special guest who is joining us all the way from Bangalore. And to tell you, Snowy Rahi is your friendly neighborhood therapist who helps clients navigate anxiety, stress, trauma, and relationships. She has a very informative page on Instagram titled Sit with Rahi, and I would definitely recommend you guys to follow it, where she actively shares therapist approved advices and tips, and she helps us live better actually. So, thank you so much, Snowy, for joining us. I'm really excited and thrilled for this conversation. How are you doing?
Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm doing fine, I think. Thank you so much for asking. I hope you're doing good too.
Yeah, I'm definitely doing good. I'm actually better now that I'm talking to you. I think one thing that you mentioned was self-help. And I want to get to self-help right now because I have seen a lot of people asking for self-help books, people reading self-help books for motivation, for learning new things, for advices on relationships, life, and everything. So, two questions here. One, do self-help books really work? And the second would be that can self-help books replace therapy?
So to answer the first question, I personally don't enjoy reading self-help books. So even when I read it to recommend it to a client, it's like a mammoth task. It's like, I have no idea why, but I struggle with it first. On the other hand, there are a lot of people, even in my own clientele, who really want it because I think they're able to practice the tools. So basically, what is a self-help book? It gives you kind of like a very brief about a struggle that you may be having. One self-help book that I do like is Why Has Nobody Told Me This by Dr. Julie Smith, I think. That's a pretty decent self-help book. She because explains the issue very promptly, and then she gives you an exercise to do. And I have a couple of other books that I'm reading in regards to self-help, and they're fine. Even Ikigai, on the other hand, is a kind of a self-help bop. It does talk about longevity and mindfulness, right? And some of the exercises mentioned there are brilliant. But with self-help, one thing is that I've noticed is it can get kind of repetitive after a point. And on the other hand, now I'm going to answer the second part of the question, that why it cannot replace therapy. It doesn't fit all your problems and it doesn't fit all the people.
Okay.
So let's say you have some issues and you pick a self-help book, and because the magnitude of the issue is low, you might actually benefit from it. So like the tip that I gave you, right? So if somebody is just struggling with, this is like a very vague example, but still, if somebody is just struggling with procrastination, doing the 5-minute rule is going to help them overcome it and life is all good, right? But typically that's not how humans work. There is always an underlying cause or an underlying reason why you're behaving the way that you're behaving. So self-help books, I think, is a very good band-aid solution at times. Like it's going to put up a band-aid, but if the wound is deep, the band-aid is just not going to work. Also, the band-aid works for like a couple of days and comes off, right? So you've got to keep replacing it, which is why people keep going after, okay, let me try this, let me try that. Therapy, on the other hand, helps you first clean the wound and stitch it up if you need it, and then puts up the band-aid so that the healing process is already started, and then now you can do it. So it's a reverse process. So I recommend self-help books in my therapy sessions after we've discussed how that self-help book is gonna help my clients in regards to the issue that we were discussing for a couple of sessions. So now they can put up a nice band-aid and use that band-aid over and over again because now it's reusable and it's good for them until the time it becomes a part of your psyche and you no longer need the book to remind you what tools work for you and what doesn't.
Okay, so would you recommend self-help books to everybody? Like I personally can't read self-help books because of shortest attention span, and I am really not interested in non-fiction, so maybe that's one reason.
That could be.
But how do you, would you recommend self-help books to everybody?
I would recommend it to people who are interested in kind of working on themselves but are not yet ready for therapy, sure,
Okay.
absolutely, pick one up. But on the other hand, I would also give you a heads up that don't get too disheartened if it doesn't help you out the way you were expecting it to. Or don't kind of give up on therapy just because you feel like, okay, this person, I spent 500 rupees in this book and it's crap and I can't even like read it. On the other hand, don't also curse your like attention span because you can't read a particular genre of book. I would never say that because, like I said, it is completely about taste. I am a therapist and I'm not very, how do I say, I do struggle with self-help books in terms of reading it as a book. I always read it as a manual. So that means that I go to a chapter and I find the chapter interesting, and then I read that chapter and highlight the things that I think are helpful. But if you were to ask me, start it the way that I generally read books, like even academic books. I can read academic books very well. So I would recommend those if somebody is really interested in psychology as opposed to just self-help books.
Okay.
So I would recommend books that are more concept based because, like I told you, as humans, we rely a lot on stories and they kind of stay with us. So if you have the concept under your wing, then it's easier for you to apply it in your life. So if you, and I'm sure some self-help books, they do that, but like picking up one book for one, like there is this book called Stumbling Upon Happiness. And that's a non-fiction, but it's written so beautifully for you to understand why we are so crazy about happiness and how can we actually achieve it in a way that I would recommend that. And if you want to call it a self-help book, then great. But it is more academically in the middle somewhere. I don't know what genre would that be. You'd be the better judge. But yeah, I would recommend books like that as opposed to just self-help books. But if somebody wants to start, I would recommend Julie Smith's Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? As a like, it's a good self-help book.
Awesome. I'm going to pick that as well, like just to see, how far I can go with self-help, and then of course see whether or not I like that genre.